Pythagoras begins his philosophy from a direction that feels very different from many others, because instead of starting with change or stability, he begins with order, not the visible order of objects alone, but a deeper, hidden structure that shapes everything that exists. Where others look at the world and see matter, motion, or conflict, he looks and sees pattern, proportion, and number. For him, reality is not just physical. It is fundamentally mathematical. This idea does not emerge as an abstract theory detached from life. It arises from observation, especially from noticing that many aspects of the world follow precise relationships. Sounds, for example, when studied carefully, reveal that harmonious tones are not random. They correspond to simple numerical ratios. The length of a string, the tension applied to it, and the sound it produces are all connected in a way that can be expressed through number. This discovery becomes a turning point. It suggests that what appears to be sensory and qualitative can actually be understood through quantitative relationships. Harmony, something that seems subjective and aesthetic, is grounded in measurable proportion. From this point, the idea expands. If harmony in sound can be explained through number, then perhaps the structure of the entire universe follows similar principles. Pythagoras begins to see number not as a tool for describing reality, but as the very substance of reality itself. Things are not merely counted. They are expressions of numerical relationships. The form, structure, and behavior of everything that exists can be traced back to underlying patterns of number. This leads to a vision of the universe as a kind of ordered system, where everything is arranged according to proportion. Nothing is random or arbitrary. Even what appears chaotic may follow patterns that are not immediately visible, but can be discovered through careful observation and reasoning. Within this system, harmony becomes a central concept. Harmony is not limited to music. It is a principle that applies to the structure of the cosmos itself. The movements of celestial bodies, the relationships between elements, and the organization of life all reflect a kind of balance that can be understood in terms of proportion and ratio. This idea gives rise to what is sometimes described as the harmony of the cosmos, where the universe operates like a vast, ordered system, each part contributing to the whole. Even if this harmony is not always directly perceived, it exists as an underlying structure that connects everything. At the same time, Pythagoras does not treat this understanding as purely intellectual. It has ethical and practical implications. If the universe is ordered according to number and harmony, then human life should aim to align with that order. A disordered life, driven by excess or imbalance, moves away from the structure of reality. A balanced life, guided by proportion and moderation, reflects it. This introduces the idea that knowledge is not only about understanding the world, but about transforming the way one lives. To understand harmony is to live harmoniously. This includes regulating desires, maintaining balance in actions, and cultivating a sense of measure in all aspects of life. From here, the concept of the soul becomes central. For Pythagoras, the soul is not simply tied to the body in a permanent way. It is something that moves, develops, and continues beyond a single lifetime. This introduces the idea of the soul's journey, where life is part of a larger process of development. The soul, in this view, is affected by the way a person lives. Actions, choices, and habits influence its state. A life that is disordered and driven by excess leads to a kind of imbalance in the soul, while a life that follows harmony and proportion leads to purification. This process of purification becomes one of the goals of life. It is not achieved through external success, but through internal discipline and alignment with the principles of order. The soul moves toward a clearer, more refined state as it becomes less attached to imbalance and more connected to harmony. This also explains the emphasis on certain practices within the Pythagorean way of life. These are not arbitrary rules, but methods for maintaining balance and clarity. Silence, reflection, and careful attention to behavior are all ways of reducing disorder and increasing awareness. The idea of transmigration, or the movement of the soul between different forms of life, further reinforces the importance of how one lives. Life is not isolated. It is part of a continuous process where the condition of the soul carries forward. This creates a sense of responsibility that extends beyond immediate circumstances. At the same time, this view connects human life to a larger system. The soul is not separate from the order of the universe. It participates in it. Just as numbers structure the cosmos, they also structure the development of the soul. The same principles that govern the movement of stars and the harmony of sound apply to the inner life. This creates a unity between knowledge, existence, and ethics. Understanding the structure of the universe is not separate from living well. It is the foundation of it. The more clearly one understands the order of reality, the more capable one becomes of aligning with it. Pythagoras also places importance on community. The pursuit of knowledge and harmony is not only an individual effort. It is supported by a shared way of life, where individuals learn from one another, maintain discipline together, and work toward a common goal of understanding and balance. This community is not defined only by social connection, but by shared principles. It is organized around the idea that life should reflect the order of the universe. This creates a structure where knowledge, practice, and daily life are closely connected. As all of these ideas come together, a picture begins to form of a philosophy that is both abstract and deeply practical. It begins with the observation that number underlies reality, expands into a vision of the universe as a harmonious system, and then returns to the individual, showing how life can be shaped in accordance with that system. Nothing in this philosophy stands alone. Mathematics, music, ethics, and the soul are all connected through the idea of order. What appears in one area reflects what exists in another. The same patterns repeat at different levels, creating a sense of unity across all aspects of existence. In this way, Pythagoras presents a world that is not only structured, but meaningful, where understanding the hidden patterns of reality becomes a path toward living in balance, where harmony is not just something to be observed, but something to be lived, and where the pursuit of knowledge becomes inseparable from the transformation of the self. As this vision of number as the foundation of reality becomes more deeply established, the attention begins to move from the external structure of the universe toward the inner structure of understanding itself. Because for Pythagoras, it is not enough to say that everything is ordered mathematically. One must also understand how the human mind can come to recognize this order and how this recognition transforms the way a person lives. The mind, at first, does not perceive this hidden structure clearly. It encounters the world through the senses, through sounds, shapes, and experiences that appear separate and unconnected. But beneath these appearances lies a deeper unity, and the task of the intellect is to move beyond the surface and uncover the patterns that bind everything together. This movement from appearance to structure is not immediate. It requires training, discipline, and a shift in attention. The mind must learn to see beyond what is immediately given and begin to recognize relationships, proportions, and recurring forms. In this process, mathematics becomes more than a tool. It becomes a path of understanding, a way of aligning the mind with the structure of reality itself. As the mind engages with number, it begins to develop a different kind of clarity. Numbers are not affected by change in the same way physical objects are. They provide a stable framework within which change can be understood. Through them, the mind gains access to something that does not shift with every moment, something that reveals the deeper order beneath constant variation. This stability has a transformative effect. It brings a sense of precision to thought, reducing confusion and allowing for clear distinctions. Instead of being overwhelmed by the complexity of the world, the mind begins to organize it, to see how different elements relate to one another within a structured system. From here, the connection between mathematics and harmony becomes even more significant. Harmony is not simply an aesthetic quality, but a reflection of correct proportion. When relationships are balanced, whether in sound, movement, or structure, harmony emerges naturally. When they are imbalanced, disorder appears. This idea extends directly into the life of the individual. Just as a musical harmony depends on the right proportions between notes, a well-lived life depends on the right proportions between actions, desires, and thoughts. Excess in any direction creates imbalance, while moderation creates stability. This is not a superficial call for moderation, but a deeper alignment with the structure of reality. To live in harmony is to reflect the same order that governs the universe. It is to bring one's inner life into proportion, so that no single impulse dominates in a way that disrupts the whole. The role of discipline becomes clearer at this stage. Discipline is not restriction for its own sake. It is a method for maintaining balance. By regulating behavior, by limiting excess, and by cultivating awareness, a person prevents the development of disorder within the soul. This discipline also supports the process of purification, which for Pythagoras is not symbolic, but real in the sense that it changes the condition of the soul. As the soul becomes more aligned with harmony, it becomes lighter, more stable, and more capable of understanding higher levels of order. At the same time, this process is not purely individual. It is supported by shared practices and a structured way of life. The Pythagorean community was not simply a group of thinkers, but a system designed to reinforce these principles. Daily routines, rules of conduct, and shared learning all contributed to maintaining balance and focus. Silence, for example, plays an important role. It is not merely the absence of speech, but a way of reducing distraction and allowing the mind to become more attentive. In silence, the constant movement of thought begins to settle, making it easier to perceive patterns that would otherwise be missed. Similarly, attention to diet and behavior reflects the idea that every aspect of life contributes to the condition of the soul. What a person consumes, how they act, and how they interact with others all influence their internal balance. Nothing is isolated. Every action participates in the overall structure of one's life. This level of integration creates a continuity between knowledge and practice. Understanding is not separate from living. It is expressed through it. A person who understands harmony but lives in imbalance has not truly grasped the principle. True understanding shows itself in the way life is organized. The idea of the soul's journey also becomes more detailed here. If the soul moves through different states and possibly different forms of existence, then each life is part of a longer process. The goal is not limited to immediate success or comfort, but to the gradual refinement of the soul across time. This perspective introduces a long-term view of development. Actions are not judged only by their immediate results, but by their contribution to the overall movement toward harmony. Choices that seem small in the moment may have lasting effects on the condition of the soul. It also creates a deeper sense of responsibility. Since the soul carries forward the effects of its actions, the way one lives cannot be separated from what one becomes. Every decision participates in shaping the future state of the self. At the same time, this does not lead to fear or rigidity. It leads to awareness. The purpose is not to avoid all error, but to continually move toward greater balance. Mistakes are part of the process, but they are also opportunities to recognize imbalance and restore proportion. As this understanding grows, the distinction between the individual and the cosmos becomes less rigid. The same principles that govern the movement of the universe are reflected in the development of the soul. The micro and the macro mirror each other, creating a sense of unity across different levels of existence. This unity reinforces the idea that knowledge is not fragmented. Mathematics, ethics, and spiritual development are not separate paths, but different expressions of the same underlying structure. To understand one deeply is to move closer to understanding the others. Over time, this leads to a more integrated way of seeing and living. The world is no longer divided into separate domains, but experienced as a connected whole. Patterns repeat, proportions align, and relationships become clearer. In this way, the philosophy continues to unfold. moving from the recognition of number as the foundation of reality toward a deeper integration of knowledge, practice, and the development of the soul, where understanding is no longer abstract, but becomes a guiding force that shapes every aspect of life. As this integration between knowledge, discipline, and the development of the soul becomes more refined, the philosophy begins to open into a deeper understanding of how structure itself emerges. Because for Pythagoras, number is not only a tool for describing reality, but the very principle through which reality takes form. What appears as solid, visible, and concrete is, at its foundation, shaped by relationships that are not themselves material, but numerical and proportional. This leads to a shift in how existence is understood. Instead of beginning with physical objects and asking how they relate, the perspective reverses. It begins with relationships and asks how these give rise to what appears as objects. Form becomes primary, and matter becomes something that receives and expresses that form. Within this framework, certain numerical relationships take on particular significance. Simple ratios are seen as especially fundamental, not because of preference, but because they appear repeatedly in the structure of harmony, both in sound and in geometry. These ratios are not arbitrary. They reflect stable patterns that can be found across different domains, suggesting that the same underlying principles operate everywhere. Geometry, in particular, becomes a way of visualizing these principles. Shapes are not just figures drawn in space, but expressions of proportion. A triangle, a square, or a circle represents a specific kind of order, a way in which relationships are arranged. By studying these forms, the mind learns to recognize structure in a more precise way. This study is not only intellectual, it has a transformative effect on perception. As the mind becomes familiar with these patterns, it begins to see them beyond the abstract, noticing similar structures in the natural world, in movement, in growth, and in the arrangement of things. What once seemed irregular begins to reveal underlying order. At the same time, this understanding deepens the idea of harmony as something that exists across different levels. Musical harmony, geometric proportion, and ethical balance are no longer separate concepts. They are expressions of the same principle, appearing in different forms. The same ratios that create consonance in sound also appear in spatial relationships and in the balance of actions within a life. This creates a powerful sense of unity. It suggests that the universe is not made of disconnected parts, but is structured through repeating patterns that can be recognized and understood. Each level reflects the others, creating a coherence that extends from the smallest detail to the largest system. Within this unity, the human being occupies a unique position. The mind has the ability to recognize these patterns, to understand them, and to align with them. This capacity is not automatic. It must be developed through study, reflection, and disciplined practice. But once it begins to unfold, it transforms the way reality is experienced. The idea of purification returns here with greater depth. It is no longer only about regulating behavior, but about refining perception. As the mind becomes less distracted by surface appearances and more attuned to underlying structure, it begins to operate with greater clarity. Confusion decreases, and understanding becomes more direct. This refinement also affects the relationship between the body and the soul. The body is part of the changing material world, subject to flux and limitation. The soul, while connected to the body, has the capacity to move beyond immediate sensory experience and grasp something more stable. The goal is not to reject the body, but to avoid being entirely governed by it. Through discipline and awareness, the influence of immediate impulses is reduced, allowing the intellect to guide action more consistently. This does not remove desire or sensation, but places them within a broader structure where they do not dominate the whole. At the same time, the idea of the soul's journey continues to expand. If the soul participates in a larger order and moves through different states, then its development is not confined to a single moment or condition. It is part of an ongoing process that reflects the same patterns found in the universe itself. This introduces a sense of continuity that connects individual life to a wider system. Personal experience becomes one phase within a larger movement, where growth, learning, and transformation continue beyond immediate circumstances. This perspective reduces the sense of isolation and places individual effort within a broader context. The role of community also becomes more significant at this level. Shared understanding strengthens individual development. When people engage in the same pursuit of harmony and knowledge, they create an environment that supports clarity and balance. Each person contributes to the stability of the group, and the group reinforces the development of each person. This collective aspect is not merely practical. It reflects the same principle of harmony found throughout the philosophy. Just as numerical relationships create balance in sound and structure, relationships between individuals can create balance within a community. Cooperation, respect, and shared purpose become expressions of this principle. As these elements come together, the philosophy becomes increasingly comprehensive. It no longer focuses on a single domain, but connects mathematics, perception, ethics, community, and the development of the soul into a unified system. Each part reflects the others, creating a consistent and interconnected whole. This unity also changes how knowledge itself is understood. Knowledge is not simply the accumulation of facts, but the recognition of patterns. It is the ability to see how different elements relate to one another within a structured system. The deeper this recognition becomes, the more coherent the world appears. At the same time, this coherence does not eliminate complexity. The world remains rich and varied, but its complexity is no longer experienced as disorder. It becomes something that can be explored and understood through the same principles that underlie simpler forms. Over time, this way of seeing begins to stabilize. The mind becomes less reactive, less distracted by immediate impressions, and more focused on underlying structure. This creates a sense of clarity that extends beyond specific situations, influencing how one approaches everything. In this way, Pythagoras moves closer to a complete vision, where reality is understood as a system of relationships grounded in number, where harmony connects all levels of existence, and where the development of the soul is guided by the same principles that shape the cosmos itself. As this vision reaches its fullest depth, everything begins to gather into a single, unified understanding where number, harmony, and existence are no longer separate ideas, but different expressions of the same underlying reality. What began as an observation about musical ratios expands into a complete view of the world, where structure is not imposed on things from the outside, but arises from within them as their very foundation. The universe, in this final sense, is not simply ordered. It is order itself, expressed through relationships that can be understood in terms of proportion. Every form, every movement, every transformation reflects an underlying numerical pattern. What appears complex on the surface is grounded in principles that are simple, stable, and repeat across all levels of existence. This does not mean that reality becomes reduced or simplified. On the contrary, it becomes richer because every detail can be seen as part of a larger structure. The smallest element reflects the same order as the largest system. The movement of a single object and the arrangement of the cosmos follow patterns that are different in scale, but similar in principle. Within this structure, harmony becomes the central thread that connects everything. It is not something added to reality, but something that emerges when relationships are properly aligned. When proportions are balanced, harmony appears naturally. When they are distorted, imbalance follows. This applies equally to sound, to form, and to life itself. At this stage, the distinction between knowing and living disappears almost completely. To understand harmony is to embody it. Knowledge is no longer something held at a distance, but something expressed through action, behavior, and the overall shape of one's life. A person who truly understands the order of reality does not live in contradiction to it. This creates a form of stability that is not dependent on external conditions. Just as numerical relationships remain constant regardless of how they are expressed, the principles of harmony remain stable even as circumstances change. A life aligned with these principles maintains its balance even when external situations shift. The idea of purification reaches its completion here. It is no longer only a process of correction, but a state of clarity where the soul is fully aligned with order. Distraction, excess, and imbalance have been reduced, not through force, but through understanding. The mind sees more clearly, and because of this clarity, it moves more precisely. This precision does not lead to rigidity. It allows for flexibility within structure. Just as a musical composition can vary while still maintaining harmony, a life can adapt to different conditions while remaining balanced. The underlying principles do not change, but their expression can take many forms. At the same time, the relationship between the soul and the larger cosmos becomes fully apparent. The soul is not separate from the order it seeks to understand. It is a part of that order, capable of recognizing itself within the structure of reality. This recognition creates a sense of unity that goes beyond individual experience. The idea of the soul's journey is no longer only about movement through different states, but about alignment with the fundamental structure of existence. Each stage of development brings the soul closer to this alignment, reducing disorder and increasing coherence. The process is not endless wandering, but a gradual movement toward clarity. This clarity also transforms how one relates to the material world. Physical things are no longer seen as the ultimate reality, but as expressions of deeper patterns. They are not dismissed, but understood in context. Their value lies not in their permanence, but in how they reflect the underlying order. This reduces attachment without removing appreciation. One can engage with the world, experience it, and participate in it, while recognizing that its forms are temporary. The focus shifts from holding on to appearances to understanding the principles behind them. Within this perspective, even change itself takes on a different meaning. Change is not a disruption of order, but a movement within it. The same numerical relationships that create stability also allow for transformation. Patterns can shift, forms can evolve, but the underlying structure remains. This creates a balance between permanence and change. The visible world is always in motion, but the principles that shape it remain constant. Understanding lies in recognizing both at once, seeing how stable patterns give rise to dynamic forms. As this understanding becomes complete, the philosophy no longer feels like a set of ideas to be applied. It becomes a way of seeing that operates naturally. The mind recognizes proportion, balance, and structure without effort. It moves through the world with a sense of coherence that does not depend on external certainty. In this state, there is a quiet sense of alignment. Actions follow understanding. Understanding reflects structure, and structure connects the individual to the cosmos. There is no longer a division between inner and outer, between knowledge and life. What remains is a unified experience where everything participates in the same order, where number is not merely counted but lived, where harmony is not only heard but embodied, and where the search for understanding resolves into a steady awareness of the patterns that shape all things. In the end, Pythagoras presents a vision in which reality is not something to be controlled or possessed, but something to be understood and aligned with, where the deepest truth is not found in isolated objects, but in the relationships that connect them, and where a life of balance becomes a direct expression of the hidden mathematical order that underlies the entire universe. Pythagoras was born around 570 BCE on the island of Samos, in a world that was still trying to understand the structure of reality through myth, tradition, and early forms of rational thought. Unlike later philosophers who would write detailed works explaining their ideas, much of what is known about him comes through fragments, accounts from followers, and traditions that mix history with legend. This makes him difficult to define with precision, but it also reflects something essential about his influence. He was not just a thinker. He was the center of a movement, a way of life that combined mathematics, philosophy, and a kind of disciplined approach to existence. From an early stage, he showed an unusual curiosity about the nature of the world. Instead of accepting explanations based purely on tradition, he sought patterns, structures, and principles that could explain how things fit together. This led him beyond his birthplace, traveling to different regions where he encountered various systems of knowledge, including mathematics, astronomy, and religious practices that emphasized order and harmony. These experiences shaped the direction of his thinking, but what makes his philosophy distinct is how he brought them together into a single idea, that the underlying structure of reality is numerical. For him, numbers were not just tools for counting or measuring. They were the foundation of everything that exists. Patterns in nature, movements of celestial bodies, proportions in music, all of these could be understood through numerical relationships. This was not an abstract claim. It was something he and his followers actively explored, searching for connections between numbers and the world around them. One of the most well-known examples of this comes from music. He observed that harmonious sounds are produced when strings vibrate at specific ratios. Simple numerical relationships create order and beauty in sound. This discovery suggested something deeper, that harmony itself is not random, but structured, governed by precise relationships. From this point, his philosophy begins to expand. If harmony in music can be explained through numbers, then perhaps harmony in the universe follows the same principle. This idea led to the belief that the cosmos itself operates according to mathematical order, a kind of hidden structure that connects everything. This perspective transforms how reality is understood. Instead of a world driven by unpredictable forces or divine intervention alone, it becomes something that can be studied, analyzed, and understood through patterns and relationships. At the same time, his philosophy was not limited to abstract thought. It extended into the way people lived. He established a community, often described as both a school and a discipline group, where members followed specific rules and practices. These were not arbitrary. They were meant to align the individual with the order he believed existed in the universe. Life within this community was structured, emphasizing self-control, learning, and a kind of purification of the mind. Knowledge was not just something to be acquired. It was something that required preparation, discipline, and commitment. This connection between knowledge and way of life is one of the defining features of his philosophy. Understanding the structure of reality was not separate from how one lived. The two were directly linked. He also introduced ideas about the soul that added another dimension to his thought. He believed that the soul is not limited to a single lifetime, but moves through different forms over time. This idea, often referred to as the transmigration of the soul, suggests that life is part of a larger cycle rather than a single, isolated event. This belief reinforced the importance of how one lives. Actions are not without consequence. They are part of a larger process that extends beyond immediate experience. At the same time, his approach to knowledge remained distinctive. He did not present his ideas in a fully open or systematic way. Much of his teaching was reserved for those within his community, and some aspects were kept secret or shared only at certain levels of understanding. This created an atmosphere that combined intellectual inquiry with a sense of mystery. Knowledge was not simply given. It had to be earned, approached with discipline, and understood within a structured framework. As his influence grew, his ideas began to spread beyond his immediate circle. The connection between mathematics and reality, the emphasis on harmony and order, and the idea that the universe can be understood through patterns would continue to shape philosophical and scientific thinking for generations. By the time his early philosophy had taken form, he had already introduced a way of thinking that moves beyond surface appearances. A world where numbers are not just tools, but the underlying structure of reality, where harmony is not accidental, but the result of precise relationships, and where understanding requires not only thought, but a disciplined way of living that aligns with the order of the universe itself. As his thought began to develop further within the community he established, What becomes increasingly clear is that his philosophy was never meant to remain at the level of abstract ideas about numbers or harmony. It was something that had to be lived, practiced, and internalized over time. The connection between mathematics and reality was not, for him, a distant theory. It was a framework that shaped how a person should think, act, and even perceive themselves within the world. At the center of this development was a deeper exploration of what numbers actually represent. For most people, numbers are tools, useful for counting, measuring, and organizing information. But in his view, numbers carry a kind of structure that reflects the very nature of reality. They are not inventions. They are discoveries. They reveal relationships that exist independently of human thought. This idea becomes more powerful as it expands. If numbers reveal structure, then understanding numbers becomes a way of understanding the world itself. Mathematics, in this sense, is not separate from reality. It is a direct path into its underlying order. He and his followers began to explore this through patterns and proportions, looking for consistency across different areas of experience. Geometry, for example, was not just about shapes. It was about relationships, how forms are constructed, how parts relate to wholes, and how balance is maintained within structure. These investigations led to a growing sense that reality is not random or chaotic at its foundation. It follows principles that can be understood, even if only partially. This belief creates a kind of confidence in the intelligibility of the universe, the idea that there's an order that can be approached through careful study and disciplined thinking. At the same time, this intellectual pursuit was closely tied to a structured way of life within his community. Members were not simply students. They were participants in a system that required commitment, discipline, and a willingness to reshape daily habits. This included rules about behavior, speech, and even diet. While some of these rules may appear unusual or symbolic, they reflect a deeper intention. The goal was to bring the individual into alignment with the order that he believed governed the universe. Disorder in life was seen as a reflection of disorder in thought. By creating structure externally, the mind could gradually become more ordered as well. Silence, for example, played an important role in this process. New members were often required to remain silent for extended periods. This was not merely a test of obedience. It was a way of developing control over impulse, of learning to observe rather than immediately react, and of creating space for deeper reflection. This emphasis on discipline reveals something essential about his philosophy. Knowledge is not just about acquiring information. It is about transformation. It changes the way a person sees, thinks, and acts. At the same time, he deepened his thinking about harmony, moving beyond music into a broader understanding of balance within the universe. Harmony, in his system, is not limited to sound or proportion. It becomes a principle that applies to all aspects of existence. Opposing forces, when properly balanced, create stability. Excess or deficiency leads to imbalance. This idea connects to health, behavior, and even social structure. A well-ordered life, like a well-tuned instrument, requires the right proportions. This perspective creates a strong link between mathematics and ethics. Living well is not separate from understanding structure. It is an expression of it. Just as a musical harmony depends on precise ratios, a balanced life depends on the proper alignment of thought and action. He also continued to develop his ideas about the soul, connecting them more closely to this framework of order and harmony. The soul, in his view, is not fixed or static. It moves, evolves, and carries the consequences of actions across time. This movement is not random. It follows a kind of structure, just like everything else. This belief reinforces the importance of discipline and self-control. Actions are not isolated. They are part of a larger process that shapes the condition of the soul over time. Living in alignment with order contributes to harmony. Living in disorder leads to imbalance. At the same time, his teachings maintained an element of separation from the wider society. The community he formed was not fully open in the way later philosophical schools would be. Knowledge was shared gradually, often in stages, and some aspects remained reserved for those who had demonstrated commitment and understanding. This created a layered system where not everyone had access to the same level of insight. It reflects his belief that understanding requires preparation. Without the right foundation, deeper ideas could be misunderstood or misapplied. As his philosophy continued to develop, it became clear that what he was building was not just a theory of numbers or a set of rules for living. It was a unified vision where mathematics, ethics, and the nature of reality are interconnected. Everything, from the structure of the cosmos to the behavior of an individual, is part of the same underlying order. And to understand that order is not simply to observe it, but to align oneself with it. By this stage, his system has moved beyond curiosity into commitment. It demands attention, discipline, and a willingness to see the world not as a collection of separate events, but as a structured whole, where patterns, proportions, and relationships define not only what exists, but how it should be understood and lived. As his philosophy continued to deepen within the structure of his community, what began to emerge more clearly was that his understanding of numbers was not limited to external patterns in the world, but extended into the very nature of existence itself. Numbers, in his view, were not simply descriptive. They were formative. They did not just explain reality. They participated in shaping it. This shift brings his thinking into a more abstract and demanding space. If numbers are the foundation of reality, then everything that exists can be understood in terms of relationships, proportions, and structures that are ultimately mathematical in nature. Objects are no longer seen as isolated things, but as expressions of underlying patterns. This perspective changes how one looks at the world. Instead of focusing on surface appearances, attention begins to move toward structure. What matters is not just what something is, but how it is arranged, how its parts relate, and how it fits into a larger system. He and his followers began to explore these ideas in more symbolic ways as well, assigning meaning to certain numbers and patterns. Some numbers were seen as representing balance, others as representing unity, diversity, or progression. While this may seem like a step away from strict mathematics, it reflects an attempt to connect numerical structure with broader aspects of existence. This blending of mathematical insight with symbolic meaning creates a philosophy that is both analytical and deeply interpretive. It is not satisfied with measurement alone. It seeks meaning within structure, trying to understand not just how things are ordered, but what that order signifies. At the same time, his thought continued to emphasize the importance of inner transformation. Understanding the structure of reality was not enough if it remained external. The individual had to reflect that same order internally. This required more than intellectual study. It required discipline, attention, and a consistent effort to bring one's life into alignment with the principles being studied. This is where the connection between knowledge and way of life becomes even stronger. A person who understands harmony in theory but lives in disorder contradicts the very structure they claim to recognize. For him, this contradiction is not minor. It reflects a failure to fully grasp the meaning of what is being studied. He also developed a deeper sense of the relationship between order and disorder. Order, in his philosophy, is not simply the absence of chaos. It is a precise arrangement, a balance of elements that creates stability and coherence. Disorder, by contrast, is not just randomness, but a misalignment, a disruption of proper proportion. This idea extends beyond physical systems into behavior and thought. A disordered mind is one where impulses are not balanced, where attention is scattered, and where actions are not guided by clear understanding. Bringing order to the mind becomes part of the same process as understanding the order of the universe. At the same time, he continued to explore the idea that the universe itself operates as a kind of harmony. This is sometimes described as the harmony of the spheres, the idea that the movements of celestial bodies follow mathematical relationships that create a kind of order, even if it is not directly heard or perceived. Whether taken literally or symbolically, this idea reinforces the central theme of his philosophy, that the universe is not silent in its structure. It follows patterns that, if understood, reveal a deeper level of coherence. This perspective creates a sense that human life is not separate from the cosmos, but part of the same system. The same principles that govern the movement of stars also apply, in a different way, to the structure of thought and behavior. He also became more focused on the idea of limitation. Not everything can be understood immediately or completely. There are levels of knowledge, and moving between them requires preparation. This reinforces the structure within his community, where learning is gradual and often restricted. This approach may appear exclusive, but it reflects a belief that understanding must be developed carefully. Without the right foundation, deeper ideas can be misunderstood, reduced, or distorted. At the same time, this creates a tension between openness and control. Knowledge has the potential to transform, but it also carries the risk of being misused or misinterpreted. Managing this balance becomes part of the structure of his teaching. As his philosophy reaches a more mature form, it becomes clear that what he offers is not just a way of explaining the world, but a way of living within it. It connects external patterns with internal discipline, mathematical structure with ethical behavior, and individual life with a larger order of the universe. It does not separate knowledge from existence. It integrates them, suggesting that to truly understand something is to allow it to shape how one lives. And within that integration lies a deeper implication. That disorder, whether in thought, behavior, or society, is not simply a problem to be fixed externally. It reflects a lack of alignment with the underlying structure that governs everything. To restore order, then, is not just to change conditions. It is to understand the patterns that create those conditions and to bring both thought and action into harmony with them. By this stage, his philosophy stands as something both precise and expansive. It is grounded in observation, in patterns that can be studied and verified, but also reaches beyond that into questions of meaning, purpose, and transformation. And it leaves behind a vision of reality that is not random or disconnected, but structured, patterned, and deeply interconnected, where numbers are not just tools of understanding, but the very language through which existence itself is organized. As his life moved toward its later stages, what becomes increasingly clear is that his philosophy was never meant to be fully separated in a theory and practice, or in a mathematics on one side and life on the other. By this point, everything he had built begins to settle into a single, unified vision where understanding the structure of reality and shaping the structure of one's own life become the same task. He was no longer simply exploring numbers as patterns or relationships. He was pointing towards something more demanding, that the order discovered in mathematics is not just something to observe, but something to embody. The harmony found in ratios, in balance, in proportion, is not limited to music or geometry. It becomes a model for how a person should think, act, and live. This creates a shift that is easy to overlook. Knowledge is no longer neutral. It carries an expectation. To understand order is to be responsible for aligning with it. A person who recognizes harmony but lives in imbalance creates a kind of contradiction, not just intellectually, but at the level of existence itself. At the same time, he appears to have become more aware of how difficult this alignment truly is. It is not enough to recognize patterns in theory. The challenge lies in maintaining that order in the presence of distraction, impulse, and the constant movement of life. Human beings, as he understood, are not naturally stable in this way. Attention drifts, desires shift, habits form and reinforce themselves. Without deliberate effort, the mind tends toward disorder, even when it has access to knowledge. This is why discipline remains central, even in the final stages of his philosophy. Not as a rigid set of rules, but as a continuous effort to bring thought and action back into proportion. Discipline becomes the bridge between understanding and living. He also deepens his reflection on the idea of harmony itself. Harmony is not simply balance in a static sense. It is dynamic. It adjusts, responds, and maintains proportion even as conditions change. This means that living in harmony is not about creating a fixed state and holding on to it. It is about maintaining alignment as circumstances shift. This introduces a more flexible understanding of order. It is not something that resists change. It is something that works with it, adjusting without losing structure. At the same time, his thinking about the soul reaches a more integrated form. The idea that the soul moves through different states or forms over time is no longer just a belief about what happens after life. It becomes part of a larger framework where continuity exists beyond any single moment. Life is not isolated. It is part of an ongoing process where actions contribute to the condition of the soul in ways that extend beyond immediate experience. This reinforces the importance of living with awareness, because what is done now is not separate from what follows. This perspective adds a certain weight to action, not in a dramatic or fearful sense, but in a structural one. Actions are not random. They fit into patterns, and those patterns shape future states, whether they are fully understood or not. He also becomes more aware of the limits of human understanding within this system. While numbers reveal structure and patterns can be observed, the full complexity of reality is not something that can be completely captured. There is always more beneath what is visible, more connections than can be immediately traced. This introduces a quieter tone into his philosophy. It is not a claim to total knowledge. It is an invitation to move closer to understanding, while recognizing that complete clarity may remain out of reach. At the same time, he maintains a clear distinction between those who engage deeply with this process and those who do not. Most people, in his view, remain at the surface level, interacting with the results of structure without understanding the structure itself. They use numbers without recognizing their significance. They experience harmony without understanding its source. They live within patterns without seeing the patterns. This creates a kind of separation, not based on status or position, but on awareness. Those who begin to see structure experience the world differently. They are no longer focused only on outcomes, but on relationships, proportions, and underlying order. By this stage, his philosophy no longer feels like a set of teachings that can be easily summarized. It becomes a perspective, a way of seeing that changes how everything is interpreted. It suggests that reality is not random, not chaotic at its foundation, but structured in a way that can be approached through attention, discipline, and study. It also suggests that understanding this structure is not separate from living well. It is the foundation of it. He is believed to have died around 495 BCE, under circumstances that remain unclear, leaving behind a legacy that would influence mathematics, philosophy, and science for centuries. But what remains most significant is not any single discovery or statement. It is the shift he introduced. The idea that the universe is not just something to experience, but something to understand through pattern. That harmony is not accidental, but built into the structure of existence. And that a human life, like a mathematical relationship, can move toward balance or fall into imbalance, depending on how it is lived. In the end, his philosophy does not offer simple answers or immediate comfort. It offers something more demanding, a way of seeing where everything is connected through proportion, where disorder reflects misalignment, and where understanding carries the responsibility to live differently. And once that perspective begins to take hold, even slightly, the world no longer appears as a collection of separate events or objects. It begins to appear as a system, structured, interconnected, and ordered in ways that are not always visible, but always present, waiting to be recognized by those willing to look beyond the surface and into the patterns that hold everything together.